The film opens with Frank Perry, a man who spends his days thinking about Zoe, the daughter he loves more than anything. With a heavy expression, he walks through the worn-out hallways that have held him for 14 long years. He moves through his routine, working quietly in the prison laundry like he does every day. On his way back to his cell, Frank crosses paths with Risa, the most dominant inmate in the entire block. Once he reaches his cell, he finds his cellmate, Hedges, packing up his belongings. Frank assumes he is being transferred to another prison, but Hedges reveals that he has been released. The news shocks Frank, not because he wishes to stop him, but because he never expected freedom to come so easily for anyone. It only makes Frank sink deeper into his own thoughts. Before long, a prisoner named 2 Ton shouts out a warning that new inmates have arrived. Everyone rushes out to witness the ritual that always follows the newcomers. Most of them, shirtless, are forced to walk a narrow path while older inmates shout, mock, and intimidate them. Among the new arrivals is James Lacey, who is clearly uncomfortable with the entire scene. He tries to hurry through the chaos, wanting to escape the hostile attention. Soon, it becomes clear that Lacey is assigned as Frank's new cellmate. Frank, however, barely reacts. He stays distant and locked inside his own mind. Not long after, a guard delivers a letter to Frank, something he has not received in years. Confused, he studies the envelope, then opens it. The contents crushed him. The letter reveals that his daughter, Zoe, has fallen into drug addiction and has already suffered 2 heart attacks. Devastated, Frank stares at her photo with a deep longing as the lights go out for the night. Nearby, Lacey struggles to sleep, overwhelmed by the noise and cruelty around him, quickly realizing that survival here will not be simple. The next morning, Frank visits the small prison chapel. He reads the letter again, facing the painful truth that he is powerless to help his daughter from behind bars. In this quiet moment, he makes a decision. He has to find a way to reach her before it is too late. Then, the creak of wood beside him sparks an idea. Sudden and desperate. A plan to escape. For a man his age, it is reckless and almost impossible, but it is the only path he sees left. This is the escapist. Meanwhile, in another corner of the prison, Batista and Risa are quietly running their illegal operation out of the library. Batista manufactures his own drugs in secret while Risa and his crew handle distribution. A desperate addict named Tony tries to beg Batista for a dose, but Batista turns him away and tells him to ask his brother, Risa. Impatient and agitated, Tony storms into the library only to be stopped by Risa before he causes trouble. Risa is clearly irritated, fed up with Tony's behavior and lack of respect for his authority. While this is happening, Frank continues shaping his escape plan. He studies the weak points of the prison through vents and air ducts, looking for any opportunity. He intends to tell his closest friend Brody about the plan, but first he asks Lacey to leave the room. Brody immediately senses something serious is coming. As Lacey steps out, the other inmates watch him with a mix of curiosity and menace. Some even follow him, blocking his path. Trying to avoid conflict, Lacey rushes down the stairs toward the shower area, but tension spikes when Tony follows him. Cornered and frightened, Lacey backs away as Tony approaches with a threatening stare. Back inside, Brody listens in shock as Frank asks whether the laundry ventilation connects to the sewer system. Frank calmly explains the letter and admits that he needs to reach his daughter no matter the risk. Brody strongly opposes the idea, but he confirms that the vent does lead to the sewers. He also warns Frank about a steel barrier that blocks the way. Hearing this, Frank reveals his next step. He plans to recruit Lenny Drake, a former boxer known for smashing through tough obstacles. Brody, unable to understand the madness of this plan, argues with Frank before storming off. At the same time, Lacey returns to the cell, bruised, shaken, and deeply traumatized from his encounter with Tony. He climbs into his bunk and tries to steady himself. The next day, Frank heads to the prison gym in search of Lenny Drake. Drake appears uninterested and unwilling to get involved, but Frank explains the escape plan in a calm and steady tone, outlining why he needs Drake's strength. Careful not to attract the guards' attention, Frank gives one last push by offering Drake the possibility of freedom. Drake hesitates, thinks it over, then finally agrees to join the escape. Over the following days, Frank, Brody, and Drake meet in secret to refine every detail. They discuss possible routes, the weak points in the walls, and the tools they would need to avoid suspicion. They gather around domino games while quietly sharing information. Frank also shows Drake a wooden gap in an iron cross inside the prison chapel that could be turned into useful tools. He creates a wax imprint of the chapel key and hands it to Drake, who will forge a replica and steal what they need. Using the dismantled iron cross as a base, Drake begins crafting a tool for the escape, but he realizes he needs one more component to complete it. All the while, Tony keeps a close eye on them, sensing that something is being plotted behind closed doors. In the days that follow, the prison hosts a brutal boxing match where Drake faces off against 2 Ton, a massive fighter feared by everyone. Drake does what he can to defend himself, but he takes hit after hit until his face is covered in blood. Just when it seems like he is about to go down for good, Drake digs deep and lands one powerful punch that sends 2 Ton's diamond tooth flying across the floor. Seizing the moment, Drake quietly pockets the diamond before he is knocked down again and carried out of the ring. That night, he puts the diamond to use. With the steady focus of someone who has handled pressure his whole life, Drake attaches the diamond to a small steel drum he previously stole. Piece by piece, he builds a simple but effective cutting tool, something that might actually get them through the steel barrier standing between them and freedom. The next morning, Frank studies the bathroom drain, only to quickly look away when he notices Tony watching him. Tony corners him and demands drugs made by Batista, threatening to expose the escape plan if he does not get what he wants. Frank tries to stay calm, even as Tony's stare makes the warning feel very real. Not long after, Frank finds Lacey attempting to harm himself with a makeshift blade. Overcome by a mix of anger and fear, Frank pulls him back and warns him that this kind of reckless act will only bring attention, putting the entire escape at risk. At lunch, Brody senses that something is wrong. Frank explains Tony's threat, and together they decide to approach Batista, hoping to convince him to join their escape in exchange for his own supply of drugs. But when Frank makes the offer, Batista rejects it and instead proposes that they get rid of Tony by poisoning him. Frank hesitates, worried about the consequences if Risa finds out, but Batista brushes it off, saying addicts die from overdoses all the time. Reluctantly, Frank agrees. Batista prepares a fresh batch laced with poison and slips it onto Frank's bunk while collecting laundry. The next morning, Lacey wakes up to find Tony looming over him with an intimidating stare. Panic rises quickly as Tony grabs him tighter and makes it clear who is in control. Satisfied with the fear he has planted, Tony leaves Lacey and heads straight to Frank to claim the drugs. As Frank prepares to hand over the poison dose, one of Tony's allies, Sykes, steps into the room to test it first. Frank's anxiety spikes. If Sykes takes the first hit, Tony will know immediately that the drugs are tainted. Frank tries to stall, but Tony grows impatient, pushing Frank harder until he corners him. With no options left, Frank opens the cabinet where the drugs are hidden. But just as Sykes is about to test the batch, Lacey bursts forward, grabbing a chair and smashing it into Tony's head again and again until Tony collapses. In a surge of panic and rage, Lacey grabs a pillow and tries to suffocate him. Realizing what is happening, Frank rushes in and pulls the pillow away, leaving Tony severely injured and barely conscious on the floor. In the chaos that follows, Sykes grabs the poison drugs and sprints out of the room, while Tony, still alive but badly injured, struggles to stand. His body sways as he staggers toward the door, calling out for Risa with a hoarse and panicked voice. The inmates watch as he stumbles down the hallway until he finally loses his balance on the stairs. He falls hard, and the crack of his neck echoes through the block. At that moment, a guard rushes to inform Risa of what has happened to his brother. The prison alarm erupts across the entire block, filling the halls with a piercing warning. Frank quickly locks the cell door and starts wiping away the blood on the floor. He rearranges the bed in a desperate attempt to hide what happened, knowing it is already too late. The alarm keeps blaring, and hurried footsteps fill the corridor outside. Lacey lies on his bunk, trembling and staring blankly at the ceiling. His mind is gripped by fear, imagining the consequences that are surely coming. Frank tries to calm him with soft gestures in a forced, steady voice, but both of them know the situation has spiraled beyond control. When Frank looks at his daughter's photo, he tells Lacey that everything will be fine, offering a promise he no longer believes. Soon after, Lacey is taken to solitary confinement, leaving Frank and the others to debate whether to leave him behind. Frank refuses at first, unwilling to let Lacey face Risa's wrath alone. But when the rest of the group decides to cut him loose, Frank reluctantly agrees, and they shift their focus back to the escape plan. Meanwhile, Risa discovers Sykes's lifeless body, the result of the poison drugs. Anger and grief follow him as he enters Frank's cell. Fear tightens in Frank's chest, yet he tries to appear calm, even offering Risa a cigarette. Risa declines, making it clear that he does not tolerate smoke near him. Frank quickly puts it out, feeling the pressure rise as Risa continues to intimidate him with silent, calculated force. Frank can only watch as Risa picks up Zoe's photo from the table and asks about his daughter. He reminds Frank that family is one of the most important things in the world, and someone who loves his daughter should understand that. Risa demands an explanation for Tony's gruesome death. Frank struggles to stay composed and tries to bluff his way through, but Risa sees through the lie almost instantly. He threatens Frank and orders him to bring Lacey to his cell once Lacey returns from isolation. With that warning delivered, Risa leaves. The threat hangs heavily in the air, even though it was not said directly. Still, Frank forces himself to stay focused. The escape is the only path left to redeem himself as a father. He and the others continue preparing, smuggling small tools through laundry carts and hiding them around the prison. Everything stops when Frank is suddenly called to the visitation room. He enters carefully, unsure who has asked to see him. Behind the glass sits a woman with a face full of sorrow. Tears begin to fall as she tells Frank that his daughter Zoe has passed away. The moment the words reach him, Frank's world collapses. The weight of the loss fills him completely, leaving no space for anything else. Sometime later, Lacey is finally released from solitary confinement. When he returns, he finds Frank sitting quietly on his bunk, staring at the photo of his daughter, now nothing more than a memory. Frank gently asks where Lacey is from, clinging to small talk as a way to stay grounded in the middle of his grief. Their short exchange becomes a brief moment of escape from the heaviness of Zoe's death. Afterward, Frank explains Risa's demand, then hands Lacey a folded note and tells him to deliver it to Brody. Lacey does not understand what it means, but he follows the request and leaves Frank alone in the cell. Frank sinks deeper into sorrow, knowing the one reason he fought to stay alive is now gone. Meanwhile, Drake enters the confessional booth, signaling that the escape plan is finally underway. When Lacey arrives and gives Brody the note, Brody reads it with a troubled expression. Frank has chosen not to escape. Even without knowing the reason, the others continue with the plan. Back in the prison block, Frank steps into Risa's cell. Risa immediately asks where Lacey is, but Frank replies calmly and instead starts talking about a book he once read. Irritated, Risa repeats the question, yet Frank keeps talking, explaining how the story highlights people who believe they have everything but will one day be forgotten. Risa feels insulted and tries to intimidate him, but Frank only smiles. Frank then hands over a small, sharp object and tells Risa that Lacey is already gone. He turns to leave, but Risa suddenly stabs him in the back. The shock of pain drops Frank to the floor. As guards and medics rush in, his vision blurs, and the real world begins to slip away. In his fading consciousness, Frank imagines a different ending. He sees himself crawling through vents, diving through drainage tunnels, and reaching the final concrete barrier. He imagines Brody dying beside him, a moment that nearly breaks him, yet he keeps moving forward. He pictures Drake and Batista falling on the train tracks they must cross, each loss heavy yet distant in the haze of his mind. Finally, in the last vision that carries him beyond the pain, Frank reaches a station with Lacey at his side. From there, he walks into a quiet, beautiful park in London where he reunites with Zoe, the daughter he loved more than anything. A reunion that could only happen at the end of his journey. So, the moral of the story is, if life gets hard, at least don't make it harder by fighting giant dudes, stealing diamond teeth, and starting prison gang wars unless you really enjoy unnecessary stress.